All right, so I'm a little tied down to this over here today because I forgot to bring a clicker with me, and so I'm tied to the podium over there so that I can advance slides. I'm not sure that I really like it at this end of the room, so it's more difficult for me to sort of talk and make sure I can see everybody's bright and shining face. I told you I would produce a video for the first lecture since I forgot to bring the camera. Luckily we didn't get too far into it, and because I'm lazy I didn't get around to doing that this weekend. Actually it's not, because I am lazy, but that's not the reason I didn't get around to doing it this weekend. The reason I didn't get around to doing it this weekend is I had a motion docket in federal court in Muskogee on Monday, and so I had to prepare for what turned into what should have been a 20-minute motion, turned into an hour and a half because the other side kept arguing about minute points of law. But that's neither here nor there, so I didn't have time really to get that done. So I'm going to kind of go back. Redundancy is good. I have that we had stopped on slide 4, and this is slide 3. So if you'll bear with me for a few minutes, and we are a little bit behind on the schedule, and so I can be like Sherman marching to Atlanta because we're supposed to finish talking about ethics and IMC today. We may not get to that, so we'll be a little bit behind, but never fear, I can make up time like you would not believe when I need to. As the semester progresses on, I can just rapidly go through things, particularly those areas that are maybe redundant to sort of the overview that we get at the beginning. So, the emergence of IMC, so why did we, again, this goes back to why did we used to have a course called Advertising and Promotion? Well, it was very much viewed in the past that you just advertised your product, you put it out there. Through most of human history, the production model of marketing prevailed, or the production philosophy, this idea, if you build it, they will come, prevailed in the marketplace because goods and services were scarce. And so people were willing to settle for less than they might have been willing to settle for in today's day and age. We couldn't imagine having to settle for just having a black car. That's the famous old example of the Ford Model T. When they came out with the first mass-produced automobile that ordinary people could afford, before that there were automobiles before Henry Ford. There was an assembly line before Henry Ford. Everybody thinks that he invented the assembly line. He didn't. He did contribute to the moving assembly line and really making mass production capable. But the saying was you could have a Ford Model T in any color you wanted so long as that color was black. Well, nobody would put up with that today when you can get a car that has, you know, all kinds of different colors and all kinds of different features. But for most of human history, that was the way things were. There just wasn't a lot of choice out there. In a highly technological post-industrial world where we have the fragmentation of markets, it's no longer good enough for us to just sort of put our product out there and inform people about it and have them come. And so we see this emergence of integrated marketing communication. A lot of people that were practitioners in those firms, if you think back to those of you who liked Mad Men, how many of you liked Mad Men? Nobody in here watched Mad Men? You all are marketers and nobody watched Mad Men? I guess that's okay, because I'm a lawyer and I don't watch legal shows. I absolutely hate them. So, but if you think back to, yeah, I don't like legal shows. I don't like Law and Order. My mother just loves Law and Order. I can't stand Law and Order.
You never watched Suits or anything?
I did, but I don't like it. I mean, my mother.
That's why I didn't like Mad Men. I started watching Mad Men. I just didn't like it.
You didn't like Mad Men? I didn't like Suits either, really. But you know, everybody's got their thing. So, if you think back to that golden age of advertising, where the great thing about Mad Men was everybody was smoking and drinking in their offices at 11 a.m. in the morning. Those firms, a lot of times, would argue that, you know, IMC was just, the practitioners in the field would say, it's just the newest thing for academics to talk about, and it's really not. It really is an important concept that's evolved and developed as a result of the fact that we have this post-industrial society and we have so many choices. Just think about the choices in clothes today that you have that you didn't have. They sort of made standard sizes, small, medium, and large, forever and ever in clothing. Now you can get online and you can go to Proper Cloth and order a custom dress shirt that's supposed to be just absolutely tailored fit to you, rather than just having to buy something off the rack. So the fragmentation of markets, the growth of the internet and new digital media obviously has had a huge impact on the way we reach our customer and our ability to interact with the customer. It's no longer just a one-way flow of communication from business to consumer, but actually the ability to interact and have them engage in a concept that we've developed in marketing called value co-creation. So what does value co-creation mean to you? What do you think value co-creation means? What's an example for those of you who've had value co-creation?
I think M&M's did something.
Yeah, that's the example that I get a lot of in my Principles of Marketing class, for those of you who have that. If we think about M&M's forever and ever and ever, when I was a kid growing up, M&M's were these chocolate-covered candies. M&M's were these chocolate-covered candies. What was their claim to fame? Anybody remember their tagline?
They don't melt in your hand.
They what?
They don't melt in your hand.
They melt in your mouth, not in your hand. I can tell you, as somebody who has sweaty little hands, that that's absolutely not true. If you sweat enough, they'll melt
They were melted
in your hands, but they melt in your mouth, not in your hands. I think is their tagline. They came out they were bought in little cellophane packages, little brown cellophane packages that were like 4 ounces or something like that. And they were sort of, I remember a big thing was when they came out with a new color. As I recall, and I may be wrong on this, but as I recall, they did have at one time red M&Ms, and then because of red dye number 10, or something like that, which turned out to have some toxic properties, they pulled all of the red dye. So there was a period there in the 1970s when I was growing up where nobody used red dye for anything because it had this sort of property that was alleged to, I think, be cancerous, if I recall correctly. And then they found something else that would substitute, and so they came out with red M&Ms. But they were sort of the same colors. There was yellow and blue and brown and green and then red, I think. And that's all you could get M&Ms in were these packages. If you were, a business or something like that, you could buy boxes of them. Now you can buy M&Ms in all different kinds of containers and in all kinds of different colors. You can customize your M&M, so you can pick your colors. You start here, and you pick your colors for your M&M. You can choose up to 3. You can add your creepy image to it for your wedding day. It is kind of disgusting, and it turns out, they pinched faces on this M&M, but you can add your image to it. You can put text on it, and then you no longer have to just settle for this stupid little, brown paper or cellophane package. You can actually get it in favor packs for parties, bulk candy, M&Ms, so that you can put it out on your desk, and everybody can go by with their grubby little hands and pick up M&Ms as they pass by. You shouldn't do that, by the way. When they do tests, how many of that, have I ever told you this? Did I tell you this last time? Oh, yeah. So they did analysis of those stupid mints that restaurants put out, and they did an analysis on those, and the wrappers overwhelmingly, because people go to the restaurant right before they leave, contain traces of uric acid from people who didn't wash their hands. So think about that, putting a bowl of candy at your desk and people walking by.
You think that's the same with little toothpicks?
Yeah,
Those in the
I'm
mouth.
sure it is.
So sometimes a lot of people don't get mints, people get toothpicks. And
But, you know, I'm not terribly germophobic, so I grabbed the mints.
Well, and honestly, you just build up an immunity to it.
Yes, yeah.
So you can select your own packaging here. This is value co-creation. How is this value co-creation? Well, now you've created something that maybe people have fond memories of from their childhood, and you've allowed them to personalize it to them, to their event, to their wedding, to their anniversary, whatever, their birthday party, their kid's birthday party. And you can create happy memories. So you're creating this along with the company. You're engaging in more than just them offering a product for sale. You are together creating a unique product for you. Right? And so that allows us to better serve our customers. So we're no longer just tied to this idea of we want one thing or one size fits all or 3 sizes will fit most. We have this idea that we can really engage in high degrees of mass customization. One of the first companies to do this, again, not just M&M's, but Dell. It didn't used to be, now it's sort of changed a little bit in the last few years, but if you wanted a Dell computer, you called Dell up or you went online and you selected the computer and the suite of packages that you wanted, the software packages that you wanted, the memory that you wanted. They offered it in sort of 3 different sizes, small, medium, and large originally, as I recall. And most people thought memory meant storage, and it doesn't with regard to computers. What does it mean?
Speed, isn't it?
It's processing, yeah. So most people, so you know, nobody knew, so they selected the middle one, unless you were sort of a computer nerd. But it was a mass customization. Now, they've realized that to some extent, people don't necessarily want that much customization, and they are selling Dell computers in the big box stores. Why is that? Well, if you think about laptops, particularly, with a desktop, it's not as much an issue, but with a laptop, one of the things that you really want to be able to do, and that's sort of critical, is you need to be able to actually experience it, don't you? Because laptops vary widely in terms of the keyboard size, and whether or not that's, you know, I've got fat little fingers, and so whether or not I can actually use, little netbooks don't work terribly well for me, because I've got these chunky, you know, Polish sausage-like fingers, and I need a bigger keyboard, or at least I think I do. What's another issue that comes along with laptops?
Number pads. I did not
The number
think
pad.
about mine. I hate that I did, because at the time when you're a freshman in college, you'd have to like think about it. You have to take into accounting and stuff like that.
And to be able to 10 key,
Yeah.
so you have to add on to the computer?
Now, yeah.
You can actually buy
There's,
it.
yeah, there's an extension. I got
Right.
that cheaper. I didn't get the Apple one.
So what else is important about laptops? So number pads, that's different. You know, full keyboards, you've got a 10 key pad. What's really critical about laptops? The mouse,
Storage.
the way you use the pad, things like that can be critical. I think one of the biggest issues with laptops for me is how heavy it is.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
I remember the first laptop I had, it probably weighed, I don't know, 7 pounds or something like that. And I thought that was great because, you know, you couldn't lug around your desktop computer. But now, that's pretty heavy to be lugging around. What do most laptops probably weigh now?
2 pounds, maybe.
Yeah,
No,
what is-
some of them, they, you know,
My
advertise-
Air weighs less than that.
That's what I'm saying, the Airs are at like max or super light. That's why you know you don't see port CD players on them anymore, or disc players, because they try to compact.
Compact.
Yeah, so.
Well, I work at American Fidelity, and so there's that whole entire company, whether it's in California or New York, nobody has desktops. Everyone has a laptop. They have no desktop company-wide.
And that's a change in the corporate environment. Why do they want to give you a laptop? You think that this is just so nice of them, isn't it?
So you can be working at home.
So you can work at home, that's exactly right. How many people actually do take their work home?
We have to.
Quite a few.
Yeah.
It's not because they're just so nice and kind. It's
Well,
because
honestly,
they're
that's more
manipulating
convenient though,
you.
because if you do want to leave early on a Friday or something, but I'm still this week.
Yeah, that's true. Telecommuting has become more and more, a lot of businesses are recognizing that telecommuting is a great way, as long as people's metrics are up and their performance is okay. It's a lot cheaper if you've got somebody at home than paying for this building, for example, to be air conditioned. And office buildings are expensive. Changing lifestyles, economic uncertainty, and changing media consumption. So if you go to those, I discussed the fact that there are I think in here there are 5 generations now in the workforce. There are traditionalists, those are the people that are somewhat called often by Tom Brokaw and others the greatest generation. There are their children, which are the boomers children, which is my generation, the Gen Xers. Most of you are millennials in here, so the Gen Y. No, no, their parents are the greatest. The World War II generation is what they refer to as the greatest generation. That was the last generation that really believed in ultimate sacrifice. I mean, huge numbers of people went off to war, you know, and enlisted, didn't have to be drafted. The baby boomers were the Korean War era and the Vietnam War era, and there was a lot of skepticism about those conflicts after we initially got into them. And so generally the traditionalists are what they refer to when they say the greatest generation. So there's millennials, which are your generation, and then now the generation after you, we're starting to see them into the workforce. And that's, yeah, they're calling it Z, and other people have not come up with a really good name for it. My generation, the Gen Xers, were the first to be called the me generation, to focus mostly on me. Your generation is the me generation on steroids, and so we have this changing media consumption. Even between you and I, there is a difference. I grew up in a world where we had computers, but I remember when I got my first laptop, and that was a big deal. You not only have grown up in a world where laptops were common and almost everybody had one, you also have this device that's attached to your hand that you think that you can't live without, and I somewhat empathize because I've got my crack phone over there, and if I leave it somewhere, I start jonesing for the iPhone to figure out what's going on, who's doing what, and check my social media accounts and stuff like that. So the consumption habits are changing. However, as we look at those generational cohorts, there are ones that still respond to traditional media outlets and that one-way flow of communication. So who's most likely to get their news and their information about products from traditional advertising, print, TV, radio, would you guess? Yeah, the traditionalists. They're the least likely to have access to a computer. They're the least likely to be used or plugged into all of the social media, although that is changing as they recognize the benefits of doing things like what? Why are traditionalists somewhat embracing new technology?
To be closer to your family.
Yeah, that's exactly it. To be closer to their family. They want to, you now, if you don't live in the same town that your grandkids live in, you can do what?
FaceTime.
You can FaceTime with them. It's great. I never forget the first time my mother realized she was being used as a babysitter, a virtual babysitter. My brother said, "Carson and Elle want to talk to you." And he hands my mother, he hands the phone to Carson and Elle, and 30 minutes later they're playing hide and go seek with Grandma, putting her in their palms. And she finally says, "Where are your parents?" And they're like, "Oh, they're out back talking with having dinner with so-and-so." So she'd been manipulated into being a virtual babysitter, yeah.
It's
I
just-
could see everyone really bad.
It's crazy because so I interned at Gartner this summer, and with Gartner Symposium, they were actually sending out mailings as a form of promotion. It was just ironic because it's entirely an IT company, but they were reaching out to other tech companies to promote it with mailers, and it was different. I don't know, it was one of those things that I wouldn't have expected them to go through all of that effort with mailers whenever they can just send out emails or have salespeople call on them or whatever.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing how you would think that a tech company wouldn't do that. I worked for a tech company called the American Education Corporation. We merged with K-12, so we developed learning management systems for K through 12. And K-12 bought us because they wanted our backbone. We had a really good backbone and a really good content, so that they could develop virtual high schools and things like that. And when I worked for them at the time, we still received a lot of our orders. We were a tech company. We developed learning management systems so that people could log in online and get their coursework and did virtual high schools and things like that. And a lot of our orders came in on a fax machine. And it was just crazy. And this was not that, I started there in 2005 and left in 2009 to go get my PhD. So it's not like we're talking about decades ago that we were they were still using a fax machine. And why were they still using a fax machine? Because lots of schools and lots of our institutions, we sold a lot to prisons. didn't have access to the internet, particularly the prisons, because they don't want the prisoners to have what?
Wi-Fi.
Yeah, access to the outside world. So they were still faxing us.
Contraband they get through Jones and stuff is just like,
Yeah.
I know someone that used to work at the McAllister prison, which is like the worst of the
But
worst.
what you don't want them doing is managing their criminal organization outside the prison. Yeah, they get a lot of contraband in
Yeah, I know, but
to the
phones and
prison.
stuff, like, there was one that they saw, like, I think one was on the news, but like, they get like drops all the time from drinks and stuff. And there was one I knew someone that used to work at the McAllister prison, and there was like 2 iPhone X's in there, and they like had little, packing peanuts and stuff in there, and they were in the boxes. They were working.
They managed to sneak a lot of stuff in,
Through
so.
Jones and stuff, I'm like, that's some interesting stuff.
So the changing media consumption habits of consumers is affecting this and the need for integrated marketing communication. So the growth of advertising and promotion, again, if you think back on that production era, most of life, you didn't have to do a whole lot of, for most of human history, you didn't have to do a lot of advertising and promotion, you just sort of put the product out there. You made people aware of it, maybe through the newspaper. But as we became more complex, advertising became a vital form of communication for both businesses and consumers, to be made aware of new products and services. And sort of the golden age, again, is that Mad Men era, the 1950s and 60s, when television really took off. Before that, though, there was radio, and of course, it used to be that people relied on print media and catalogs. When I was a kid, still growing up, in the late 1970s and early 1980s, one of the big things was the wish book that came out every year, and that was the Sears and Roebuck catalog that people actually looked forward to coming out every year. Sears is now on its last leg. They've sold off their most profitable thing, which was the Craftsman tools. And so I'm not sure how much longer they will be around. And in fact, forever and ever, the Sears Tower in Chicago was one of the largest buildings in the world, and it was a big deal to go to the Sears Tower. It's no longer even called the Sears Tower. They lost the naming rights to that building quite a while ago. It's now called something else, although I still call it the Sears
It's
Tower.
the John Hancock Center.
Is it?
Yeah, the John Hancock Insurance Company owns it.
They named it something else.
I mean, I
You
was-
may be right. I don't remember what they call it, but it was forever the Sears Tower. They were one of the largest companies. And you could buy all sorts of things from the Sears and Roebuck catalog. People, that's why it was called the Wish Book. People waited for that to come out around the Christmas season. I live in Guthrie, which is about 15 miles to the north of here. I used to be vice mayor there. And people bought, in Guthrie, we actually have these homes that are called shotgun houses. Those were purchased out of the Sears and Roebuck catalog. You could buy an entire house out of the Sears and Roebuck
It's not like a
catalog.
mobile home, it's like a.
No, it's like a wood house. It's a wooden, this was at the turn of the century. They were built in 1905, I think,
Shotgun
um,
houses?
for the most part. And they're called shotgun houses because they said, in order to get cross ventilation through the house, they said you could stand on the front porch and shoot chickens in the backyard without ever hitting any of the woodwork in the house, because they just went straight down in a row. And so you could shoot a shotgun out and not hit anything.
Except shotgun spray, so that doesn't.
Well, not, I mean, depends on what shot you have.
It also depends on the choke that you have on the shotgun. If you use a full choke or an improved cylinder. But that was why they were called shotgun houses. You could buy those. You could buy chickens from the Sears and Roebuck catalog. You could buy, I think you could even buy mules at one point in time. They would ship mules out from Sears and Roebuck. All kinds of farming implements and things like that. So that began to change, of course, as we got more and more sophisticated. Television advertising, of course, became more prevalent. Radio became more prevalent first, then television. In the 1980s, advertising accounted for $53 billion in the U.S. economy, and the promotions techniques were slightly less at $49 billion. But you see that it was still, there was rough parity in the splits there. By promotion, we mean samples, coupon, contests, sweepstakes, premiums, and rebates. We still have those. So what's a modern example of a promotion technique, like a modern couponing thing that's now online? How many of you sign up for Groupon? Groupon is modern couponing. Anybody know an extreme couponer?
Oh, my old horseback riding instructor and was one, and she had like a binder.
A book, a binder of all of the coupons. I have friends that do this. And as a marketer, I should be impressed. They usually go to the store, and their house is like a warehouse. They buy stuff that they don't even want because they can get enough money back on stuff that they usually leave the store owing like, you know, for $200 or $300 worth of groceries, they'll owe $5 or $6 or something like that. They have all kinds of stuff that they don't use and they just buy it and give it away. So in 2016, there was $571 billion spent in marketing communication. $127 billion is still in traditional media and $68 billion is going to digital and online. But that number will change, right? It will begin to flip. So we're still seeing a lot of money being spent on advertising, the Super Bowl, things like that. But it will begin to flip. Why is that? Well, one of the things forever and ever when we taught advertising, we talked about the difficulty in measuring the return on investment. It's easier to measure the return on investment in online because you can count click-throughs and you can track how many of those click-throughs actually did what? Purchased from your site. So it's more efficient. It provides more measurable results as we become a metric-driven society. We now compile all kinds of metrics that we never would have thought of compiling in the past simply because we have the computing power to do that. There's more computing power in your laptops than existed in the world in, 1950. It's incredible. And so we can now really measure these things with a great deal of accuracy, and it's one of the areas that is becoming increasingly important. So there are a couple of areas in marketing that students often ask, what can I do with this degree in marketing? Well, if you get a degree in sales, I can guarantee you're going to get a job. That's one area that's growing, but the other part of marketing that's growing is data analytics. People who can understand data analytics are commanding premium price tags because they're able to understand the math and crunch the numbers to figure out these kinds of things and measure results. And we can do micro targeting now that we couldn't have thought about doing even 10 years ago. So that's a huge area of growth and expansion. So the role of marketing, sort of a history of marketing and IMC within the marketing discipline. So in 1935, the National Association of Marketing Teachers, which is the forerunner of the American Marketing Association, the largest marketing association in the world. And by the way, this is one area, colleges of business are one area where we don't look to European scholars as being the great minds in the field. Because we're a relatively new discipline and we developed in the United States largely, schools of business developed in the United States. We are the dominant force. And so the biggest names and biggest scholars in the field of marketing are not going to come from Europe. Whereas that's not true if you talk about big names and scholars and things like, if you cross the parking lot, the land of hippy-dippy over there, otherwise known as liberal arts, they have this department that studies the most useless of stuff called philosophy, which we'll talk a little bit about when we talk about ethics. The greatest scholars in the world are going to, we have a great school to produce those in the United States. It's called Harvard and Yale. But the big name scholars in many instances come from those European schools. That's not true of business disciplines, where we were really the forerunners in that field. Because European scholarship really believed that was sort of vocational education, and they were slow to embrace the movement towards the academic disciplines in the business field. So in 1935, the National Association of Marketing Teachers comes up with this definition of marketing, and they say that marketing is the performance of business activities that direct the flow of goods and services from producer to consumer. There's a problem with that definition in that it doesn't recognize that marketing is done by almost everybody, right? We're constantly engaging in marketing. It's not just businesses that engage in marketing. That definition was adopted when the AMA was founded in 1948 and again in 1960, and the definition stood for about 50 years. The AMA's current definition is that marketing is the activity, set of institutions, and processes for creating, communicating, delivering, and exchanging offerings that benefit an organization's customers, the organization itself, its stakeholders, and society at large. I think that's a pretty good definition because it recognizes that marketing is the activity, the sets of institutions. So it can be an individual activity. And I tell students that you should think about this in relation to yourself. Make this personal to you. If you really want to learn a discipline, figure out how you can use it in your own life. So think about how you can use integrated marketing communication to tell your brand story. Think of yourself as a brand. You're going to go out and you're going to market yourself to businesses. And it's going to be important that you speak with a unified voice. So one of the things that you want to do, and you think about this, and how you can relate this to yourself, is how can you develop your own integrated marketing communication to speak for yourself? You might be doing things that are not reflective of what you want your brand to represent and posting it online. And it's amazing to me from time to time. I have those of you who, I started years ago, I got I'm going to really date myself now, right? When the first big social media platform appeared, anybody remember what that one was?
Friendster?
Yes,
It was MySpace. It was like sort of the really first big one. There were some, Facebook started out as a minor thing and then took over. But there was MySpace. Most of you probably don't even remember MySpace now, do you?
I have one. I remember you could change the music on your profile.
Oh, it was great. It was basically, MySpace was basically a way that you could have your own website without learning programming. You could go out and you could grab code from people and you could put it into your MySpace and customize it.
Oh, you
so
make
you
your
could have,
background like move and stuff?
Yeah,
I
you
had
could have-
little like
you could
gifs and
grab-
I'm moving around.
you could grab all kinds of stuff and you didn't have to know programming to do it. And it was kind of messy and clunky, and so it really, I thought MySpace would be much bigger than Facebook when Facebook first came out, because Facebook was very simple and very basic and very clean, and that's actually what people preferred, because they would go to people's MySpace pages, and because you all did that, if you all were of that generation where you did MySpace, you grabbed too much stuff, and so it took a long time to load, it slowed things down, and it was clunky. So,
Isn't that why
from
Google
time to
is so
time-
big too, is 'cause it was so simple?
is what?
Isn't that why Google is like so successful, because their page was so simple?
It is very simple, yeah. However, they've not been successful. They've tried to come out with a competing version of social media that has not really taken off, which is Google Plus, right? And it's not been as successful as Facebook, although we'll see how long Facebook will last. One of the things that has happened is since I put together, when they first came out, because I taught marketing and I put together a MySpace page and then a Facebook, and now I've branched out and I've got other stuff like,
Twitter's where it's at.
oh God, I can't think, Instagram, and I've got Twitter because the competitions like ICSC use Twitter. So from time to time, students will add me, they'll send me a friend's request and I'll accept it. And then I'm sort of horrified by the things that they post on their Facebook page, like the beer bong at the frat party. Probably don't want to do that. I tell students, think you ought to use, I used to say use the mama test, but most of you are very good friends with your parents and you drank with your parents, and some of you got high with your parents. And so, it's less, they're more accepting. So now I have to say things like use the grandma test. Would you want your grandma to see this on your Facebook? So this definition recognizes that it is an activity, that we as individuals can engage in it. The thing that I would add to the definition is that, and this is redundant for those of you who've had me for principles of marketing, but redundancy is good, is that marketing is a pervasive social activity. I would say at the beginning, marketing is a pervasive social activity. We do it constantly. Whether we think about it or not, we are constantly engaged in marketing. And we're constantly engaged, if you think about this, as yourself being a brand, you're constantly engaged in integrated marketing communication, whether you think about it or not. And employers are going to pull up, if they can, your Facebook accounts and things like that, your social media. And if they see things like that, you may not be sending the message that you want to be sending. So it is a pervasive social activity. You cannot escape it. Unless you go to a deserted island and live on your own, you're going to engage in marketing. You want people to like you. You're going to need them to give you a job. And so you constantly engage in marketing. You all engage in marketing in this class, and that you're going to need others to help you with the group projects in here. You're going to need each other to help study and things like that. And so we constantly do this. That's the reason that everything that we do, you should think of, since you are marketers, as a statement of marketing, even down to the things that you wear. I deliberately dress this way for a reason. It is my marketing statement. Before I became a marketer, I was a lawyer, and I think that lawyers should dress like lawyers. Because when bad things happen to you in my presence, I don't want you to be caught unaware, because lawyers are really good at making bad things happen to people, if we want them to, right? Bad things happened to the opposing side yesterday in my motion here. So I don't think you should be caught unaware.
I feel like a lot of people that have big businesses, they don't have their personal social media anymore for that reason, and they just keep the companies.
Yes, they do. A lot of them do. A lot of my mother's done that.
The successful big companies, you don't see the owner having an Instagram.
No, they don't.
Because
And there's a reason for that.
Right.
Because they don't want their personal to interfere
Well, and
with.
they don't care about showing the things that they have either. Like
Yeah.
people our age, they just, oh, look what I just bought, or just things like that.
Look at like the NFL draft, like players were getting drafted and they had problematic tweets back in 2009
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
were racist or whatever.
Yeah.
Or demonstrated misogynistic tendencies. And that can be problematic for teams and their image. So yeah, I mean, this is things that you ought to think about as you develop your own, sort of integrated, as you do your own analysis of your situation. But yeah, a lot of businesses, my mother is like that. She has to have a Facebook account and a personal page because she has a business, and so she's developed the business page. But she doesn't really post a whole lot
Right.
on her personal page, and she maintains very tight control over what people can post on her page. And these are even done by people that I think should know better. I have a friend, for example, that's been a friend of mine for a long time on Facebook, and he said he just drove by his old employer. He posted this on Facebook. He said he drove by his old employer, and he said, I felt the overwhelming urge to flip the bird. And this is a guy he's a director of communications. And I'm like, you may not want to post these kinds of, like bitter is not a good color.
And going back to the outfits, one of my professors last semester, he's a lawyer, but he's now teaching. But he gave an example where if you have two lawyers and one of them has a crappy car and dresses poorly, and then you have one that dresses super nice and has a nice car, but the crappy person is a better attorney, they're still going to pick the one that looks better.
Absolutely. How do you evaluate attorneys? And that's very difficult for most people who are not attorneys to evaluate. And so you use these sort of social cues as an indication of success. If you go up to the big law firms, if you go to the big law firms in Oklahoma City, or Crowe and Dunlevy, everybody knows who Crowe and Dunlevy is, and Maccabee Taft is one of the other ones that's an old firm. There are all of these indicia of success: the leather seats, the fine artwork that's in the office that's presented, so that you understand that you're, now for a lot of people that also means that they can't afford those kinds of attorneys, right? So it can also be a signal that you don't belong if you walk around and you think about how many billable hours they have to make it. But yeah, we look at these sort of heuristics to determine and to analyze whether or not we think that a lawyer is going to be successful. I often use that as an example in my principles class of how do you evaluate these credence properties in services marketing. And usually students tell me that it's by win-loss. That's how they would look at whether or not an attorney is any good. And I usually say, as my example, my counterexample, the dumbest people in my law school class have great win-loss ratios. That's because they've gone into the district attorney's office. If you can't figure out that you cannot graduate from OCU, which is where I graduated, And when I graduated, I was paying $900 a credited hour for law school. If you can't figure out that you can't service the debt on what they pay in ADA, you're an idiot. I mean, you're stupid. You're like a prime example of someone who should be naturally deselected. And yet, they did this. They went to OCU, and then they go into the DA's office making $30,000, and they're $150,000 in debt, and don't understand why they can't pay their bills. But hey, they have great win-loss ratios, because the criminals are even dumber than them. They're even more stupid.
One of my friends is about to take the LSAT, and she's shadowing a lawyer that works for one of the car ones, you know, like you get a wreck, like the ambulance chaser. That's what my dad called them. So every time that she references that law firm, I'm like, oh, the ambulance chaser, because they always have their ads online. There's like a car crash and really bad graphics and stuff like that. Anyway, he's like, yeah, if you graduate law school and you go anywhere besides OU, so like Tulsa or OC, that's expensive. He's like, go into divorce first and then pay off your school and then do whatever you want.
Or you need to go into something else. I mean, you need to go into something more lucrative. I would say commercial transactions, mergers and acquisitions, and that's going to be something that pays well, but not criminal prosecution work. You're going to have to go somewhere else for that. So the evolution of IMC, we talked a little bit about this already. It was heavily dominated to begin with by mass media firms. Sales, promotion, direct marketing, package design were viewed as auxiliary services that were usually purchased on an ad hoc basis as they were needed. And companies didn't, for the most part, update those for a long time. Most of the cereals when I was growing up had a very sort of old-fashioned look to them. Now, one of the things you have to think about is, as we have progressed, what may have been acceptable in the past, as you update your integrated marketing plan, is looking at whether or not social acceptance has changed. And there's a good example of this in a consumer packaged good that probably all of you have heard of, called Aunt Jemima. How many of you have heard of Aunt Jemima?
Syrup?
It's also a pancake mix, right? They make pancakes and syrup. And their promotional materials for a long time, and they actually had a woman, she was, I believe, from Oklahoma. I may have that wrong, but I think that's what I read, that she was actually from Oklahoma. She died recently, who was the face of Aunt Jemima for a long time. And what was that stereotypical image that they used for Aunt Jemima? Well, it was a kind of Southern stereotype of the Old South. And it was, I mean, it's horribly, in this day and age, we recognize that it's horribly what? You can find these old Aunt Jemima cookie jars for sale if you go into antique stores and things like that, and you get online and look at their old advertising. Well, it was a black woman in a headscarf, hair wrapped up, and white apron. And it was sort of this romanticized, Gone with the Wind style of promotion. The more modern version, Aunt Jemima now looks like a middle-class business woman in the advertising that they've come out with. They didn't want to totally abandon the mark because it has such emotional appeal for a lot of people. Are you getting on your phone to look up the old images?
No, I'm looking at the new one. I haven't seen the new one.
The new one?
I think I have some that's still the old.
Let's see if we can, this is the new one.
Yeah.
So you can sort of see a progression. They actually had a black woman, as I said, she recently died, an African American woman that played Aunt Jemima and went around to county fairs and things like that and promoted the brand. But it's sort of an updated, this is the new one right here.
Oh, the mean one.
This
I can't really tell much of a difference though. Like,
She just has a thinner face and has earrings in, and it's not wearing a headscarf.
And I think it's a full promotional ad, she's wearing a string of pearls.
So instead of like 1850s, you get 1950s. big thing.
Yeah,
It's a big
that is,
update.
that's sort of I guess that the hairdo is sort of the 19. What's another brand that has realized that they're gonna have to change? Uncle Ben's is another one that was
Right.
predicated on sort of an old fashioned, and the recognition that you're gonna have to update that. So, things that in the past, and this is, sports teams have realized this, and some have decided to change and some have not, that things that we accepted in the past have maybe racist connotations today. What's one of the biggest ones, and they've actually lost their trademark in terms of a national sports
The
team.
Redskins?
Yeah, and a lot of people have asked them to change. A lot of the Native American groups have asked them to change. Now, why is it, and forever, Oklahoma City, where I graduated from law school, their mascot was called the Chiefs, and they had sort of the stereotypical Indian with the headdress with all the feathers on. And they changed to the Stars when it became sort of politically unpalatable, particularly in the state that has the largest Native American population, to maintain this. What's the difference between the Redskins and the Noles, which is not a professional sports team, but it's a college sports team? So which state are called the Seminoles?
Florida State.
Florida State. Why does Florida State get away with it?
Because it doesn't sound like a racist term, it just, Seminoles, that's
They were
a
called
tribe.
the Seminoles.
Well, that's what the Seminole
Redskins,
tribe is
yeah.
originally from.
Yeah, well,
That's what
it's
different
also
from-
not like, it's not very,
They've also approved it.
yeah.
The tribe itself is actually
Supportive of it?
supportive of it.
I'm from Shawnee, and that's like one of the biggest, like, there's like 5 tribes that kind of meet all around Potawatomi County. And there's a small high school nearby mine, and their student population is over half Native American, and their name is the Redskins. And it was actually one of the white parents that suggested that it was racist. And so they're trying to file a lawsuit against the school, and everyone's like, there's a reservation on how far away from it, consider it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things. It's interesting because Florida State has continued to get away with it, mostly because the Seminole tribe of Florida. So there were 2 Seminole tribes, and by the way, the Seminole tribe of Florida is enormously wealthy. They are the owners now of Hard Rock. So all of the Hard Rock cafes are owned by the Seminoles of Florida. There was the Seminoles that retreated into the swamps when they were moved, and there are the ones that were actually removed from Florida and made it to Oklahoma. And those are the Oklahoma Seminoles, but they are basically the same cultural tribe. But the Seminoles in Oklahoma have not done as well as the Seminoles in Florida, although I don't know that anybody has done as well for their people as the Chickasaw have. Chickasaw Nation Industries is just a huge, huge business now.
Do you think it's a lot of because of the seniors and stuff, or is it?
They have, C&I, yes, they have a casino part, and obviously that's a big thing. We actually have, by the way, if you're interested to know this as a fun fact, there are more casinos in Oklahoma than there are in Nevada, so we have more casinos here. And we have the world's largest casino. It's called WinStar. It's down on the Oklahoma-Texas border because Texas doesn't allow table gaming and stuff like that. So there's this huge flow of people that come across the Red River to go to our casino. And it started out as one of these little tiny, Butler building type casinos that they've just added on to, and it's now got 4 towers. I believe it's almost a mile if you go from the North Tower to the south end of the casino, and it has got the largest casino gaming floor. We also have more earthquakes, by the way, in Oklahoma now than they have in California. So we have the world's largest casino and the most casinos of anybody. And so that's obviously been a big part of C&I, but they're also huge defense contractors. They have, that's how they really got their start, in doing defense contract work. So in the 1980s, we began to see this broader perspective emerge where it wasn't just advertising and promotion. And many ad agencies themselves began to then adopt this, what we've been talking about in academia, and became IMC agencies that incorporated sort of a one-stop shop for all of these things. Historically, if you went back again like Mad Men, all they were focused on was largely ad campaigns for television. And you had people that specialized in radio and direct media and things like that. The biggest being the advertising agencies for TV and radio. So they now do PR, sales promotion, and direct marketing. And they sort of integrate all of those. And it's useful to have an agency that does that, because then you can ensure that you are speaking with a more consistent voice to your consumer or your constituency. The American Association of Advertising Agencies began to develop a definition for integrated marketing communication, and it's kind of long and cumbersome. But again, you should know it for an exam to see what the definition is. Anytime we begin to study a discipline, the foundation of that discipline is going to be dependent upon how we define the parameters of the discipline. What makes it as a science different from biology? Biology is the study of living organisms. So it's a science, and marketing is a science, but we have to define the domain. And so this first definition developed, a concept of marketing communications planning, and I will post this on D2L so you can get the slides if you want it, but it is good that you are all taking notes. You remember things more if you take notes. I just had problems. My computer is not uploading for some reason onto D2L. It keeps telling me that there's an error in my office, so I'm going to have to do this at home. So I apologize for not getting these up before. But normally I'll have these up before the lecture for you. A concept of marketing communications planning that recognizes the added value of a comprehensive plan that evaluates the strategic roles of a variety of communications disciplines. For example, general advertising, direct response, sales promotion, public relations, and combines these disciplines to provide clarity, consistency, and maximum communication impact. To speak with a unified voice. And some scholars have begun to argue that we need an even broader approach, or a bigger picture approach that involves all of the firm's activities. So this is important, because I told you that marketing is the only integrated function of the firm. And so what you want to do, what marketing seeks to do, is to make sure that all aspects of the firm add value. We're the only discipline. You can run a business without knowing anything about double entry bookkeeping. I know the accountants think that they, are hot stuff and it's really important. But lots of businesses are run by very simple people who don't know anything about debits on the left and credits on the right, unless of course you're in banking, in which case they're reversed. You can run a business without knowing that. You can't without marketing, because it goes from product development to actual, touching the consumer, and you have to have sales in order to have a business survive. So you can do a lot of things, you can't, and marketing seeks to make sure that all of those contribute and add value. So how is it that marketing works with accounting? Well, in larger organizations, you have to have some understanding of the financials to be able to set your goals and sales quota for salespeople, and so you're going to get a lot of those numbers and figures from the accounting department. And understanding how they use those numbers and how we may look at those numbers differently than the accountants do is important, because we are an integrated function. And I'll give you an example of that. With the company that I worked for, the American Education Corporation, we had this product called Learning Letter Sounds. It was our most basic product. It was a very, very simple product to use, but it was extremely effective in teaching kids to read. And a lot of school districts that were hesitant to buy us could afford Learning Letter Sounds, and then when they saw the advantages to that and the impact that it had, they were willing to invest in more of our product because they came to believe in it. The accountants constantly wanted us to get rid of that product line because they said, it's not really making any money. And in some instances, in some quarters, we lost money on it because of the promotion. But it got us in the door with a lot of these schools and institutions. And so it was critical. So we need an even broader approach in our marketing communication, and that's why they're arguing for a bigger picture approach and something that focuses on the consistency of the communication. And consistency is good. It ensures that you don't send a mixed message to your consumer. So Don Schultz at Northwestern has provided another definition. Integrated marketing communication is a strategic business process used to plan, develop, execute, and evaluate coordinated, measurable, persuasive brand communication programs over time with consumers, customers, prospects, employees, associates, and other targeted relevant external and internal audiences. The goal is to generate both short-term financial returns and build long-term brand and shareholder value. So there's a couple of things that I want to point out in there. Look at the focus that he has on both external and internal audiences. It's important as marketers that we communicate to all of the aspects of the firm. And one of the things that we had to do with our accounting department is they had a tendency to think that accounting existed for accounting's sake. And it doesn't. Again, you can run a business without an accounting department. Now, we needed them because we were a publicly traded company, but getting them to understand our perspective and why we needed the numbers that we needed, and at one point in time, I'll never forget, we asked for a report from one of the accountants, and the numbers were all wrong, and his response was, "Math is crazy." And I almost became apoplectic. No, right? I mean, I've never heard an accountant say, I was just like, no, it's not. And I hate to say this, but he was a graduate of UCO and had a CPA. Yeah, he was a UCO graduate. Math is crazy. It's the craziest thing I'd ever.
Was he fired?
No, we had a boss who didn't like to fire anybody. So, no, he wasn't. So understanding what the mission of the company is, that we really need to work with all these areas so that we understand that we're adding value overall to the customer experience. So it's both internal and external. I want to focus on the last sentence as well. The goal is to generate both short-term financial returns. Obviously, lots of businesses, particularly small businesses, focus on the short term more than long term. Why is that? Because lots of small businesses are in survival mode. And so they're going to measure things with regard to return on investment. So it's for both short-term financial returns and to build long-term brand and shareholder value. Now, how do we do that? It's by constantly monitoring. And I can give you examples in my own business of how we do this. We constantly monitor the sites that rate. I have a lodging business in Guthrie, the Stone Lion Inn, and we constantly monitor TripAdvisor, Travelocity, and those sites to make sure, and we seek constant feedback from our customers when we meet with them, when we talk to them. It's largely a very hands-on business, but to build that sort of long-term brand shareholder value is really important, and understand where your place in the market is and what value you do bring. So it's both about, obviously you have to have short-term financial returns in many instances or you're going to go broke, but also how you understand that longer term. And even small businesses like mine can do this. A lot of people think, and a lot of small businesses, and a lot of the examples in the textbook, I just love the textbook because it's got all these big, I wish they would write textbooks that didn't have corporate examples. I'm being facetious when I say I love the textbook. Because it talks about examples probably that some of you have never even heard of. One of the examples that I was looking at, I think in chapter 2, was talking about Manischewitz. And they said, you've probably heard the Manischewitz slogan, and none of you have heard of Manischewitz because you're not. I'm Jewish, so I of course know they make kosher food and kosher wine. It's god-awful wine, by the way. It's just, kosher wine is, it's horrible. It's like cough syrup. But you know, apparently among your generation, there's some that are making a comeback because you like sweet. So they're talking about Manischewitz, which is a big company. Even small companies can do this. They just have to think about it, and it's one of the reasons why entrepreneurs probably should take, you know, a marketing course or two so that they understand how you can do this even on a small scale. Even if you can't hire big data analytics firms to do this, you can engage in this kind of analysis on a daily basis, and not necessarily, it doesn't require that you do all that much, because we do have so many options in terms of our connectivity through things like this, the ability to manage and look at that. So the rationale for IMC for developing this comprehensive approach as opposed to an ad hoc approach, developing a new package and hiring them as auxiliary services, is you avoid duplication. That's good. We don't want to spend more resources than we have to. If you can reach a customer through one medium, and that's the most effective, you don't necessarily want to duplicate that. I love this. Your textbook tells you take advantage of synergy among promotional tools. What the hell does that mean? If somebody can define synergy for me, I'll give you 5 bonus points for today.
It's all groups of the business working together in one entity.
I think that's pretty good. I think that's close. I think this is a term that's become very popular as we talk about synergy. I'll give you the 5 points for that. I think of it as being more, the whole is more than just the sum of its parts. Now that's not always true. If you think back to a movie, and again I'm going to date myself here, called Pretty Woman.
Oh, yeah. It is good.
I'm surprised. See how in touch you all are. That when I was growing up, that was a chick flick. No self-respecting male would have admitted to have watched Pretty Woman. But Richard Gere was, really cool. So I'll admit that I watched it. What was Richard Gere in that movie?
The rich man.
But what did he do specifically? How did he become rich?
Oil probably.
Huh?
I just say oil, I don't know. I've never seen
That's
it.
Oklahoma.
Never seen the movie.
No, I've seen it, but I don't remember what he did. I just remember he was.
I was
a
like
sugar
10
daddy.
when I saw it, so it's been a while.
It's been a while. Nobody remembers what Richard Gere did?
Just sugar daddy, that's what he was.
No. He bought companies and he broke them up because the breakup of the company was worth more than the whole in many instances. You can sell it. That's called arbitrage.
That's what they did with Toys R Us.
And there's an old saying, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. If you teach a man to arbitrage, you will feed him and his family for generations to come. So he was an arbitrageur. And in that instance, the business is worth more broken up. So the parts are worth more than the sum of the whole. Well, I think of synergy as being sort of exactly the opposite, where when you put these parts together, it's worth more than just the sum of those parts. Something greater than just the sum of those parts. Why is that? Because if you take those individual pieces in your integrated, in your marketing program, not every touch point, one of the reasons I duplicate what I say in here many times is because you have to be receptive to my saying it. You have to be in the right frame to listen. Your mind wanders. It's why I change my cadence every so often. I walk around the room. I tell funny jokes. I go off on tangents. Because if I'm off on a tangent, you're actually then refocusing your attention on me and listening. And so you have to be receptive. So you take all of these touch points, and if you speak with that consistent voice, you're more likely to have a positive impact on that consumer that you want to reach than if you just reach them with one alone. They have to be ready to hear it. A lot of times people, so if you think about a company, big companies that engage in all of the tools, not every company is going to engage in all of the tools that we have in the marketing promotional mix. They're not all going to engage in television. My business can't afford, because we're a small business, to engage in television advertising. So that's not one of the things that we do. But in those touch points where we do communicate with consumers, we're making sure that it's a high impact. And so having that consistent message, it develops a brand equity and creates a more lasting impression and may lead to greater customer lifetime value. Whereas if you're just doing this on an ad hoc basis and your message is muddled, maybe they're getting the message through these various, but if it's not all connected and speaking with a single voice, they may not view the company in the light that you want them to. So it takes advantage of these synergies, this idea that the whole is greater than just the sum of the parts. So for
companies like Ford, which use all kinds of things. They use, obviously, advertising promotion. They'll have spots on radio. They use advertising in print media. And what is it that Ford wants you to know? For example, what if I say Ford,
Every month.
it's truck month every month, and it's the what? What is it? Ford's really good. In fact, they're doing away with all of their cars except one, the Mustang. That's it. They're doing away with everything else because their biggest seller is what?
SUVs and trucks.
SUVs and trucks, and the #1 selling truck in America year over year, Ford F-150.
Built.
Yeah. And so they are consistent in that message. It increases your efficiency. Now, I want you to focus on these two terms, efficiency and effectiveness. Not the same. Students oftentimes confuse these and they lump them together in the same. You can be radically efficient and not effective, right? What's efficient? Means you use the least resources possible, but you may not be effective. If Ford, for example, just decided that all they were going to do was advertise on television, that's horribly efficient in terms of reaching a voluminous number of people. People still watch TV. It's the easiest way to get coverage on a nation, particularly, and one of the reasons that Ford usually advertises during the Super Bowl is because you're going to get what? The absolute most viewers.
Yep.
I mean, it's a wonderfully efficient, even though it's expensive, it is wonderfully efficient. Does it necessarily mean that it's the most effective? No. It may be efficient, but it may not be the most effective. Why? What? Well, people watch the Super Bowl commercials just for they watch the Super Bowl just for the commercials. And so you have a lot of people that may not be looking to buy a Ford F-150. They're just curious to see who's going to have the most outrageous commercial during the Super Bowl this year. And the last couple of years, I have to tell you, have been huge disappointments for me in terms of the quality of the advertising.
And the
Reasons
halftime shows too.
a lot of people, but it may not necessarily be the most effective. If my company were to advertise on the Super Bowl, it would be wonderfully efficient in terms of the numbers of people that we could reach, and we couldn't afford to do it. But it wouldn't be very effective, because most people are not coming to Oklahoma bed and breakfast to watch the Super Bowl. Right? So efficiency and effectiveness, you want to be both, not just one. You can have something that's remarkably effective, and it may be horribly inefficient. What's the most effective selling tool that you can have? Well, if you can afford to do it, obviously, having personal sales is it's hard to tell people no if they keep showing up. I teach sales. I like sales. If, people keep showing up. Well, we had this one sales guy that kept showing up every week at the American Education Corporation, wanting to get us to switch from, I can't remember who we were using for our office supply company at the time, but he wanted us to switch to Staples. He was in the business-to-business Staples field. And he was really persistent. And that's effective, because it's hard to tell somebody no week after week after they eventually wear you down. So you want to be both efficient and effective. Not necessarily the same thing, although a lot of times we use them interchangeably, and they're not, and we need to think about that. In order to maximize your return on investment, to maximize what you're paying, you want to get the most bang for your buck on that. So the promotional mix involves advertising, direct marketing, digital, internet, sales promotion, public relations, and personal selling. As we go through here, we'll talk about all of these in more detail. Obviously, each of these in the mix has its advantages and disadvantages. Advertising, for example, on television and radio. Radio, again, you can reach a lot of people with radio, but they're usually doing what? They're usually driving, which means that they may not be fully engaged on you. So they each have their advantages and disadvantages. From everything from control of the message to the coverage that you get with the message. So things that we have to think about in the analysis.
So notice the touch points, and in the past, generally, this model has got a lot more stuff on it. In the past, we used to have fewer ways of reaching people. Now you've got out-of-home media. What is out-of-home media? And some of these obviously overlap. That was something that's fairly new, out-of-home media, other than billboards. But what is out-of-home media? Well, it includes everything like billboards, and so again, they overlap. What else is an out-of-home media? Well, your cell phone that you're constantly connected to, and the devices that you carry along, not just with the cell phone, but your laptop computer, things like that. So this model has grown. It used to not include as many categories. And look at the arrows. It used to be that it was a one-way flow of communication. But now we're able to really monitor with a feedback loop, now some more than others, the effectiveness of those touch points, those contacts with the audience. Some, again, more than others. It's easy to, for example, measure promotion. Why? How can you measure promotion? Well, you put out a coupon or a sales promotion, you see how many people respond to it. You can count coupons. It's really easy to do. You can count how many people bought a Groupon online. So that's a much easier way than measuring, for example, the impact of TV or radio, which is less precise. So the planning process. Your text says you start with reviewing the marketing plan, and again, I think the authors have skipped over something here, and I put this as added by me, the author of the PowerPoint. It's developed. A lot of businesses, particularly small businesses, don't have an IMC plan. So you probably should develop one, and you have the opportunity in here to find a business in your team, and you can either choose a national team, a national company, not a national team, but a national company, and do an IMC plan, or if you want to be more creative, you can find a local business that interests you and sort of develop an IMC plan as your class project, your group project in here. So your text says review the marketing plan. That assumes a fact not in evidence, which is that you in fact have a plan, and lots of small businesses don't have plans. They don't have IMC plans. Why? Because lots of small business owners are not necessarily.
They're focused on the operations and not any of the other business aspects.
I mean, lots of small businesses are just in sort of a survival mode. So they don't actually have a marketing, an IMC plan. So develop the plan. Analyze the promotional program and your communications. You have to have a budget. There's almost nothing that a business does that doesn't cost money. Then develop your IMC program, implement, and of course, you can't just put the plan on the shelf. This is the most critical part, and it's one of the most frustrating. We do a lot of planning. UCO does an enormous amount of planning. I've served on lots of planning committees, and it's very frustrating because they don't ever monitor, evaluate, and control. They just sort of put the plan on the shelf and you know, don't ever change anything. Why is that? That's because it's a big institution and bureaucracy sets in, and so it's easy to become complacent and just do things the way we've always done them. Which means that in many instances, if you can get a small business, or if you are developing a small business, it's easier to do these things. It's easier to monitor and evaluate. We had to really, in my business, in the age of an internet, we had to really evaluate and monitor and control a lot more than we used to in the past, our marketing program, because it's so dynamic and it changes so quickly, and you have these abilities of people to engage in NWOM, or negative word of mouth. And I am out of time, so I'm going to stop there. And that's the end of chapter 1. So we're not quite caught up. We'll do ethics next time and hopefully get into chapter 2. Did I ask if you came in late, you should have time to roll. If you came late, you need the roll sheet. All right. And be sure to get your points. Let me turn the monitors off. So all right.
So you have to all have to go.
Well, I use the book, I take about 50% of my stuff from the book, stuff that I agree with in the book.
Yeah, I have it, I just didn't know if we were gonna be referencing it a lot, or if it was gonna be more like their principles and stuff. Because,
Yeah, every book has its problems.
Yeah.
I have a tendency to think that if you just wanted to read the book, you could take, we teach this course online,
yeah.
and so you don't, I try to point out where I think, and the authors are obviously, experts in IMC,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean that.
In a classroom experience, not real world experience.
Yeah, I'm not sure that they have,
Yeah.
or their real world experience at times, like a lot of scholars,
Yeah.
is 20 years, 20 years old.
Yeah, exactly, so. All right, thank you.
So I'm in your business this parking lot.
Uh-huh.
All the dates they kind of throw out, like for June.
No, there's two.
Just like, those are mine.
I mean, I don't know why DHL did this.
No, and it's
I
a
mean,
problem, I was just gonna ask, do I just use the syllabus to,
Yes,
for the dates and everything?
yes, but if you look at this, like, if you look at the calendar,
uh-huh.
see, it tells you like, last mile is to
okay.
upcoming events.
Gotcha.
If you go to assessments, for some reason, I don't know why, and you like click on quizzes,
Uh-huh,
you'll see that like all of these have been updated, but then
Oh,
it
okay.
copied all of them.
gotcha, yeah.
Twice.
Because like if you go to content and then
Yeah.
under each individual quiz, it
It's-
still says like June and July, so.
I don't know why it did this, I have no idea.
No biggie, I just wanted to make sure that we just go off the syllabus.
But yeah, these are all, like, I think I've gotten through all of them.
Okay,
Yeah, I got through all the
Okay.
exam too, so like all of these, I don't know why I did that, I have no clue.
so they're all just open, we can take them whenever?
Except for exam 1 and 2, the quizzes are all just open, I opened them on the day. But they should be, if you look at the course calendar, like I said, I don't know why I
What
decided
happened?
to do
Okay,
that.
it's no big deal, I was just curious, thank you.
So, but I will be sure, I've got to remember to send out an email.
Yeah, appreciate that.
You can use the old edition if you want. That's fine.
Okay.
How much do we have to talk to you?
Oh, I don't know, what, did you talk today?
I mean,
Usually I say, I'll give points for this. I'll give you bonus points for that. What's your last name?
Dylan Torres.
Nope, that's the one